You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Health Hub. I'm Cathy Biase, your host, and along with our producer, Alex Diaz, we would like to welcome you to our show this morning. Hey, Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. Good morning, Cathy, and good morning to our listeners.
How is the busy season going for you?
It's a lot of hustle and bustle here at the station, for sure, but it's all well worth it.
Of course, the station does some wonderful programming. It's a little tiring, though. I'm feeling a little tired myself today, actually. I did some baking last night.
Oh, okay.
It's funny when we start with these traditions when the kids are young and they really want to keep them going as they're now adults. It's trying to fit in all these things during the season. It's
one of those things for me. I like baking as well. And when Christmas time rolls around, it's like the ideal time to get with the family and start baking in the kitchen for me anyway. I try to not rush these things so that I can enjoy them, but getting everything in, the weekends fill up, the nights fill up, but it's so it can be a little bit tiring, but I do like doing it. I only really bake once a year, and I'm not allowed to change anything, so it's the same 5 or 6 recipes every year, but it's something a nice
we do.
Tradition.
It is. But we're trying to, with the kids doing all their different things. Right now we have a tree in our living room with nothing on it, and we're trying to figure out a time to decorate it.
Oh, so that beats me. I haven't got my Christmas tree up yet.
We just went last on Sunday. It was really nice. The weather was nice. The trees were beautiful, and so it's up there waiting for people to decorate it. So I guess what we have to do now is just go with the majority. But such is life. We try and get all these things done, but such a busy time of year, but it's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Our show today is live. You can call in at 416-245-1534. Please do follow us on all of our social media sites. We have great information for you on upcoming shows, some little tidbits and so forth. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at the Health Hub RMC. And our email is thh@radiomaria.ca. And thank you, everyone, for the great feedback that we're getting as we set up our lineup for 2019. It's really a nice time for you to give your input on guests that you might like to have on the show, future topics, any health concerns or interests that are weighing on you. Please let us know, and we will do our best to accommodate you. Please subscribe to our podcast as well. We are the Health Hub on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite podcast platforms. And you can also find our podcast both on the Radio Maria Canada website, which is www.radiomaria.ca, and on my website, which is www.cathybiase.com. And if you like what you hear, leave us a comment. Our show last week, Managing Type 1 Diabetes with Dr. Jody Stanislaw, is up and ready for you to listen to. Another great podcast with lots of great information. Type 1 diabetes was the first time we tackled that on our show. And nice to get alternative as well as the allopathic input on type 1 diabetes. It affects more people than we may know, as Lyme disease may affect more people than we actually know, and that's our topic for our show today. But before we get on to introducing our guest, Dr. Darin Ingels, now is the time to get your bone broth made. In fact, this morning my daughter woke up with a sore throat. She felt like she said she swallowed a golf ball. And 'tis the season. 'Tis the season, and usually my rotation of illness usually hits around December 23rd. I'm not quite sure why. I guess stress and tiredness, but it seems to start off with the kids early in December and then rotates through us, hitting us during the holiday. But we try our best to bulk up our immune system. And bone broth is a great one to have in your freezer. Just texted my daughter, said pull it out and thaw it. Bone broth is a great source of collagen, minerals, glutamine, a whole host of great nutrients in it. And it's good for the joints, for your skin, and it's very good for your gut health. And when you improve your gut health, you strengthen your immune system. So a really great, simple piece of nutrition to have in your freezer. Bone broth contains L-glutamine, and this really helps to heal your gut and to decrease inflammation. And you all know that when your gut is in good shape, the rest of your health will follow in tow. Amino acids in bone broth, again, are part of what helps to improve the immune system. And adding apple cider vinegar to your bone broth increases the flavor. That it's a nice part of it. But it's often a step that many people miss. But adding apple cider vinegar really helps to pull out important minerals from the bones into the liquid. So don't leave that step out of the process. It's important. So what I wanted to do today, very quickly before we start our show, is to tell you how to make a good bone broth, give you a couple of tips to make a successful bone broth. So couple of tips off the top here. Buy organic or grass-fed beef bones if possible. What the process here is that you're doing is you're putting these bones into steep, into fluid, into water for a long period of time. And what you want to leach out is healthy products. So always remember, know your sources of food. As your food sources go, so does the nutritional value of it. So trying to buy organic, grass-fed bones are the best. Organic chicken bones. You can use beef, chicken. You can even use chicken feed. All of these things are just full of great nutrients for you. For better flavor for your bone broth, use bones that have been cooked. So if you're going to use a turkey carcass, that's fine. It's already done. But if you've got raw bones, I put mine in the oven at 350 or 180 Celsius with a few seasonings on them just to increase the flavor of the bone broth. And again, make sure you add that apple cider vinegar. And I try to make my bone broth towards the end of the week. What I'm going to give you is just the bare bones of a bone broth, but I throw in all, at the end of the week, any vegetables that we might not have used. So I really try and jack up the flavor with using a whole bunch of herbs and bay leaves and seasonings and different vegetables. So you can use bone broth and you can sip it as is, or you can use it as the basis for soups or gravies. So just a wonderful, wholesome product to have. So here it is, the sort of the basic, the bare bones, I might say, of a bone broth. So start with about 2 pounds of bones. Again, it can be beef, chicken, a mixture, or a whole chicken carcass that's cooked. Make sure you put your bones in the oven. I add a couple of carrots. I add an onion. I add some celery stalks. I definitely add some garlic, about a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, some sea salt, parsley, but any seasonings that you want, a bay leaf, and about 6 cups of water. And again, this is just sort of the basics of a bone broth. Be creative, add tomatoes, add whatever you like. And I don't even take the skins off of, I wash all my vegetables, but because you're going to be dumping the broth out and putting it through a sieve, I just add everything in because the skins do have some very good nutrients in them as well. So that is another little tip thrown in there. So what you're going to do is place your bones in a slow cooker and all of your other ingredients and let this very slowly steep for at least 12 hours. A slow cooker, I find, is the best way to do it. If you don't have one, then very, very low temperature on your stove. And after 12 to 24 hours, you're going to siphon this thing, the pot through. You're going to take everything out and you're just going to have that bone broth. And you can freeze this. You can use it right away. But now is the time to make it. It will freeze for up to about 6 months. I wouldn't keep it any longer. But do make some. As I said, now is the time for cold and flu, and a great addition to your pantry. So along to our show today, our guest is Dr. Darin Ingels. He is a respected leader in natural medicine with more than 28 years experience in the healthcare field. He is board certified in integrated pediatrics and a fellow of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. Dr. Ingels has been published extensively and is the author of The Lyme Solution, a 5-part plan to fight the inflammatory autoimmune response and beat Lyme disease, a comprehensive, natural approach to treating Lyme disease. He specializes in Lyme disease, autism, and chronic immune dysfunction. He uses diets, nutrients, herbs, and homeopathy immunotherapy to help his patients achieve better health. So today's learning points, among many, are we will be talking about what is Lyme disease, what are the common symptoms of Lyme disease, and is there a cure for Lyme disease? And we will be back right after our break.
Staring at a stop sign, watching people drive by, T-Mac on the radio. Got so much on your mind, nothing's really going right, looking for a ray of hope. Whatever it is you may be going through, I know it's not gonna let it get the best of you. You're an overcomer. Stay in the fight till the final round. You're not going under, 'cause God is holding you right now. You might be down for a moment, feeling like it's hopeless. That's when He reminds you that you're an overcomer. You're an overcomer. Everybody's been down, hit the bottom, hit the ground. Ooh, you're not alone. Just take a breath, don't forget, hang on to His promises. He wants you to know you're an overcomer. Stay in the fight till the final round. You're not going under, 'cause God is holding you right now. You might be down for a moment, feeling like it's hopeless. That's when He reminds you that you're an overcomer.
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase.
Welcome back, everybody. Our show is live today. Feel free to call us at 416-245-1534. And once again, do follow us on our social sites on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We are the Health Hub we are at the Health Hub RMC, and our email is thh@radiomaria.ca. Good morning, Dr. Ingels. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, good morning, Cathy.
Where are we calling you from? You're in California?
I'm in Southern California, beautiful and sunny.
Beautiful and sunny. Everything is good there now? I guess you weren't too affected by the fires. They were more north?
Well, we had some fires down here in Southern California, but fortunately for where I am, I'm about 2 hours away from where they occurred. So we didn't really get a lot down in our neck of the woods. But, yeah, it's up in near the Malibu area, and then another set of fires up near the Bay Area. Both were severely affected. So just an absolute tragedy. But I think all that's quieted down at this point.
That's good. I was just in California last year, and we just got out before last year's round of fires. So all the best to everybody there. It's very unfortunate. But on to our topic today. How did you get involved with the study and treatment of Lyme disease?
Well, quite simply, I got Lyme disease myself.
Oh.
I had moved out to Connecticut after medical school, and I was about 2 or 3 weeks from opening my own practice in 2002, and I started getting very ill and realized that the symptoms were very consistent with Lyme, and I didn't realize at the time when I was getting all of the symptoms, I had a very high fever and joint pain and a terrible headache and numbness and tingling in my hands and feet. And I was actually getting ready to go to the hospital, and then someone had noticed that I had a big bullseye rash on the back of my leg. and because it was on the back of my leg, I wasn't able to see it. So at that point, I realized it was Lyme disease, and I started treatment right away. And really within about 4 days, I felt perfectly fine. But since I was in the middle of opening my business, and if anyone's ever owned their own business, they know what it's like where you work very long hours. And after about 8 months of working, 10, 12, 14-hour days, I started to relapse. And when I started treatment again, it didn't help, and I kept changing treatment, and it didn't help. And I really went through about 9 months of antibiotics and got worse and worse. So I was fortunate to have come across a Chinese medical doctor in New York City. I was living in Connecticut at the time, and he started treating me with Chinese herbal medicine, and within a few weeks, I really improved about 85%. So it was a good reminder to me to kind of get back to my naturopathic roots and really start examining, what I was doing in my life, what I was eating. I wasn't sleeping very well, and really started taking better care of myself, plus implementing, the herbal protocol. And that combination really is what kind of got me feeling better. But it took about 2 years to get through that process before I really felt like I was, back to myself again. So it was a long process, but it was obviously a good learning experience in how to deal with Lyme disease. There's so many things that just came out of that.
Are there certain regions more affected? So let's start with what exactly is Lyme disease, and then we'll get into the other specifics.
Sure. Well, Lyme disease is a bacterial infection, and it's primarily transmitted through certain types of tick bites. And if you look at a map of where these ticks live, most of them live up in New England in the United States and the central part of the U.S. However, what we've seen over the last couple of decades is that, these ticks have now migrated away from those areas. It's now all up and down the east and west coast of the United States and pushing in towards the central part of the U.S. So in the United States, Lyme disease has been reported in every single state. So there's no place that you're completely immune. But the vast majority of cases still are really kind of along the coast of the United States, and then sort of that central part of the U.S., which is, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. So those states that are sort of just south of Ontario in Canada. And so the tick bites you, it transmits this bacteria into your bloodstream, and once that bacteria gets into the bloodstream, it triggers that cascade of symptoms, which we'll probably go to in just a little bit. But, it's really unlike other bacterial infections like sinus infections and bronchitis. This is a bacteria that's very slow growing, very clever. It learns how to evade the immune system, so, therefore it becomes a little bit more difficult to treat.
Just doing a little bit of research beforehand, one of the things as I was, just trying to get my bearings straight with Lyme disease, it's not something that, knock on wood, I am familiar with, nor have I known anybody with it. So again, knock on wood. But one of the things that popped up first thing on Google was, I just typed in Lyme disease, and it was, is Lyme disease real? And, It seems to be it's been a contentious issue about Lyme disease and its journey to sort of validate that this is a true disease. Is that the case, or is it just a bad Google search? Dr. Ingels, are you with us? Oh, I think we've lost him. We'll try and contact him. That's too bad. Okay, we'll get back to him. Yeah, I have never actually, as I said, met, and I'm again knocking on wood, met or known, or even in clinic, known anybody with Lyme disease. I think maybe the first attention I've had brought to me was, I think Avril Lavigne had it. And I think when we get Dr. Ingels back on the phone, we're going to find out that it's a little bit harder disease to sort of pinpoint. And we're going to get into the symptomatology of it. But I think perhaps, and again, I may be wrong about this, that bullseye is the very first symptom. Oh, do we have him here? Dr. Ingels, are you on with us?
Yep, sorry about that.
That's
Somehow
no
we got cut off.
Yeah, no problem at all. I tried to fill the space with intelligent conversation. It's always like a second recognition that I'm talking to myself, and then okay, no problem. So where we left off was, as I was saying, I was doing a little bit of research, and one of the things that popped up is Lyme disease real. So has it been a contentious issue to try and validate this disease?
Yeah, it really has been. And the primary reason is that the Lyme testing is very controversial. Unfortunately, the tests that are available are really just not very accurate. So, having a reliable test that, is definitive that someone has Lyme disease has really been lacking. And, in 40 years of research of understanding Lyme, we've still really yet to have a test that's really 100% conclusive, because often what we're really measuring is the immune response to having had exposure to Lyme. So theoretically, someone could have bitten by a tick, got exposed to the organism, and if your immune system does what it's supposed to do, it'll make antibodies against Lyme, and that's the end of that. You may never get to a point where you're even symptomatic. So when you're measuring antibodies in somebody's blood, all you've really demonstrated is that they've had exposure. But, the sensitivity of the test that's currently available, or at least the commercial test that most people use, it just really isn't that sensitive. And when you look at the research, it shows it's actually about 43% sensitive, which means that it doesn't even pick up half the people that have Lyme disease. So, Lyme really becomes a clinical diagnosis, which means it's based on your signs and symptoms and less on a lab test proving that you have it. And because the symptoms of Lyme disease can often be very vague and look like a lot of other things, we get into this, contentious debate with other practitioners about, well, do you have Lyme? Do you not have Lyme? So, most of us that treat a lot of Lyme disease, we really are, fundamentally basing it more on people's symptoms. And if we get a piece of paper that demonstrates that they've had exposure, that combination of exposure plus having symptoms, particularly if you live in an area that's endemic, I was always kind of taught in medical school, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So, Lyme is kind of the same thing, that when you've got the clinical symptoms, you've got evidence of exposure, you can kind of put two and two together. But, the Infectious Disease Society of America, which is the big infectious disease group in the United States, they have taken a very conservative approach to Lyme disease. They think it's a fairly short-lived infection, and if you just take antibiotics for 2 or 3 weeks, that gets rid of it, and that's the end of that. But again, I think for most of us that are in the Lyme world, we feel quite a bit differently.
Okay, just clear something up for me. So when you're testing, are you testing for a particular type of bacteria?
Yeah, so the test that's available is looking at one particular strain of Lyme. The organism itself is called Borrelia, and the first strain that we identified back in the early 80s was called Borrelia burgdorferi. We've now learned since that there are many, many strains of Borrelia, not just Borrelia burgdorferi. So in the United States alone, there's about 100 different strains, and worldwide there's about 300 different strains. And yet the test that's available really is looking at one of them. So it's also highly possible that, someone gets exposed to a different strain, and that test just isn't looking at the right one. So that's just, one of the many factors that plays into, whether someone tests positive or not.
And how long can this stay in your system before it manifests into symptomology?
Well, once someone gets exposed, the symptoms can start anywhere from 3 to up to 30 days or potentially longer. If you look at the research, 3 to 30 days is what we typically observe. However, I have worked with people that, as far as we can tell, their exposure may have occurred many, many years prior to the onset of symptoms. So I think it's certainly possible that someone could get exposed, and at the time, if their immune system is very healthy, they don't express any symptoms, but the organism may still stay in a dormant phase. And then once they go through a period of stress or their immune system's compromised, then the symptoms start to crop out and people become more symptomatic.
Maybe we could go over some of the major symptoms and see how they fit into other diseases and why this area of uncertainty arises. So what are the major symptoms of Lyme disease?
Well, the two classic symptoms that we associate with Lyme disease, one is with a certain kind of rash called erythema migrans, or a bullseye rash. So it's a very unique, characteristic rash that literally looks like a bullseye or a target. Well, you'll see alternating concentric rings of, red, clear, red, clear. There really are no other infections that we know that cause that particular kind of rash. So that's really a telltale sign of Lyme. The other thing that's very characteristic is what we call migratory joint pain, where, one day it's your right shoulder, the next day it's your left knee, the next day it's your right ankle. Joint pain that seems to kind of wander from joint to joint is also very characteristic of Lyme, because other types of, autoimmune diseases, rheumatological problems, it tends to be the same joints fairly consistently. So those are sort of the two hallmark symptoms we see with Lyme, but there's upwards of, 80 to 100 different symptoms associated with Lyme. Some of the more common ones are, fever, chills, joint pain, muscle aches, numbness and tingling, particularly in the hands and feet. Fatigue is a big one, chronic, swollen glands, headaches, dizziness, heart palpitations, shortness of breath. It's a pretty lengthy list. There's also a condition called Bell's palsy, where one side of your face looks like it starts to droop. Those are all associated with Lyme, but, they call Lyme the great imitator or the great mimic because it looks like so many different things. So part of diagnosing Lyme is not just trying to identify if you've had exposure, but also the process of ruling out other possibilities.
So it could take quite a long time in the medical field to get this diagnosis, or do you find that this is being diagnosed more in the alternative health field?
Well, I think what happens is, for the people that have acute classic Lyme disease, they're pretty easily identified. Again, if you get the bullseye rash, if you get these other symptoms, that bullseye rash for being a characteristic symptom of Lyme, unfortunately, again, less than half the people who get Lyme disease actually develop that rash. So, we can't rely on that as a, sole marker about whether someone's been exposed or not. So I think what's happened in the alternative world is that we're seeing a lot of people who have been to several doctors that have Lyme, and either the doctor never looked for it or perhaps just didn't look for it quite in the right way. So I certainly find a lot of people that have been to numerous doctors with these various complaints for many years that a lot of times they've never even been tested for Lyme. There are labs out there, fortunately, that I think do a better job of testing. So those are the labs that we tend to use. But, if you don't look for it, you won't find it. And I think, that's one area that you'll probably find a lot of alternative doctors are a little bit more focused on. And not just Lyme itself, but I think, any kind of, chronic infection as an underlying cause of illness is pretty typical.
Okay, and just before we go to break, that bullseye rash, is that the site of the bite? Or is that not? It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the site of the bite. So when people get this rash, it's usually a single lesion. Once in a blue moon, we do see people that have multiple, but by and large, it's one tick, one bite, and then you'll see one area. And the ticks like the areas of the body that are kind of, dark and moist, so it likes behind the knee, in the armpit, and the hairline. So that's why a lot of people, even if they get the rash, they don't necessarily see it because it just goes to areas of the body they typically don't look at.
And then that rash will go away after a short amount of time. So if you haven't caught it, you're into this sort of quagmire of what's going on.
Yeah, and once you get the rash, if you do develop it, it takes several weeks. I know when I got bit, it took 3 months before my rash actually dissipated.
Oh, okay.
So it can sometimes last quite a while.
Okay, great. We're going to go to break, and when we get back, I want to get into the meat and potatoes of your book and how the common treatments, both in the medical and the complementary health field, are working with Lyme disease. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
We're all related, brothers and strangers. The king and the beggar bleed the same. We've all got a sickness, a terminal condition. We medicate it, but the pain won't go away. See the eyes of a million faces, looking for it in a million places. Only one can save us, Jesus. Everybody's searching for it, everybody's reaching out, trying to grab a hold of something real. You are father to the orphan without a home. Oh, we fell into darkness, lost till you found us. You're the remedy we're looking for. You are the cure. Everybody's searching for it. Everybody's reaching out, trying to grab a hold of something real. You are the cure. Only you can satisfy us. Fill up the void inside us. Never been hard you couldn't heal. You are the cure for the broken, the hope for a hopeless world. The meaning, the purpose, the peace that will make us whole. Don't have to search no more. Don't have to search no more. You are the cure. Everybody's searching for it. Everybody's reaching out, trying to grab a hold of something real. You are the cure. Only you can satisfy us. Fill up the void inside us. Never been hard you couldn't heal. Never been hard you couldn't heal.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada. A Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, please call 416-245-1534. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Cathy Biase.
Welcome back, everybody. We're here talking with Dr. Ingels about Lyme disease. Dr. Ingels, Karen sent in a question, and I think this is going to open a large topic of the second half of the show. And her question is, do symptoms of Lyme disease present similarly in other autoimmune diseases? So let's set that question up for you to hit out of the park by first describing how Lyme disease and autoimmune diseases are connected.
Well, they're connected, certainly symptomatically. There's a lot of overlap in the kind of symptoms that we see with autoimmune disease and Lyme. But again, we have evidence in research that Lyme itself becomes a trigger for autoimmunity, as does several other microbes. So, Lyme, in addition to causing an infection, actually has the ability to trigger the immune system, that part that actually is associated with autoimmunity. So Lyme can target really a couple of specific proteins in the nervous system especially that cause a lot of the neurological symptoms, but it cross-reacts again with some of the proteins in your connective tissue, so that's why you get the joint pain, the muscle aches, and things of that nature. So it's really that combination of what the infection itself does, plus its ability to trigger an autoimmune reaction. And the autoimmune reaction is quite a bit different than what we see in something like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. But, for example, multiple sclerosis, I think every patient I've seen in my practice who's been diagnosed with MS, often we find, Lyme. So, is it possible that Lyme is a trigger for MS? My opinion is yes. If you go to the neurologist and they give you this diagnosis and you say, well, why? They're going to shrug their shoulders. And again, I think we've got pretty ample evidence that microbes do become triggers for autoimmunity. So I've had plenty of MS patients. My Lyme turned into MS, so I experienced it myself. And, when we treat their Lyme, their MS gets better. But we've also seen this with, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and Lou Gehrig's disease and a lot of these chronic neurological symptoms. In fact, there was a very famous case, Chris Christopherson, the actor and the singer, was diagnosed with very early dementia, was found to have Lyme disease, and when he treated his Lyme disease, his dementia completely went away. So, again, any of these chronic neurological or autoimmune issues, it certainly doesn't have to be Lyme, but it certainly should be something that should be checked off the list.
That's a fascinating point. Okay, so that brings up a couple of questions in my mind. Is it, if someone has an autoimmune disease prior to getting a bite, does this set somebody up for worse symptoms, or does it set somebody up to be more than likely to have symptomology of Lyme disease? Does an underlying inflammation, I guess, cause greater degree of symptomology with Lyme disease?
Yeah, that's a great question. As far as I know, I've never read anything that specifically looked at people that had previous autoimmune disease. My guess, though, is that for someone who's already immune compromised or already has a dysfunctional immune system, getting Lyme disease probably just like throwing gas on the fire. It probably makes things a lot worse. Again, I think for what the infection would do, plus sort of adding to the autoimmune burden, it seems logical that, the symptoms perhaps would worsen.
Okay, so then if you get bitten and this triggers an autoimmune response and that leads to a disease, is that, once we get past the bite, is what you're treating actually the autoimmune disease?
It really is. What I've learned is that, just focusing on eradicating the organism is just a small part of the overall treatment. It's really about fixing the terrain. We've got to get the body in better working order. And I think, again, if you put, 100 people in a room, they all got infected with the Lyme organism, not everybody would get Lyme disease. So what's the difference? And I think the difference is in how our immune system, handles this organism. So I think if we can focus on, treating the person, really getting to the, core problems of, dealing with, gut health and immune health, part of the treatment does involve, helping to eradicate the organism, but it's a much, much larger, overarching view of, how we treat the individual.
Okay, then that sort of begs the question in my mind, can you cure Lyme disease?
That question gets asked a lot, and the C word in medicine is always, used very sporadically. The problem we have with Lyme is that we don't know that you ever get rid of the organism 100% because we can't easily measure the organism in your body. So I am of the opinion that I don't know that we ever get rid of the organism completely. I've had plenty of patients over the years that go, long periods of time of being symptom-free, and then they relapse. So is it a new infection, or is it really just the old infection that popped up again? We just don't know for sure. I mean, certainly I think it's possible, and I've experienced it where people get to the point where, they are living 100% symptom-free. So if we call that cure, then yes, they were cured. But I think there's always the possibility that if the immune system's compromised, symptoms may return. And we see a lot of people that have gone in and out of periods of being symptom-free and then symptomatic, and this goes on for several years. So again, I think it still comes back to treating the terrain, treating the person, and helping their body manage this organism without having symptoms.
Okay. Can you do a side-by-side comparison of the allopathic treatment of Lyme disease versus your care for someone with Lyme disease?
Sure. Well, the conventional allopathic approach to Lyme disease is 10 to 21 days of antibiotics. Typically, they're oral antibiotics. There is a recommendation from the CDC that if someone has neurological Lyme disease symptoms, that IV antibiotics would be preferential, but still it's for up to about 3 weeks. And at that point, you're done. Whether your symptoms have resolved or not, that's it. So it's a very short-acting treatment that only focuses on killing the bug, and that's pretty much it. My approach is much different. I rarely use antibiotics in my treatment protocol anymore. I think particularly anyone with chronic Lyme disease, we have some evidence that antibiotics are not nearly as effective for someone with chronic Lyme. I think they're great for acute Lyme disease, but once you've had it for a while, they seem to be less effective. Plus, when you're on antibiotics, long-term, they can damage your normal gut flora, which we've now learned that are critically important for modulating your immune system and just a whole host of other, health benefits. So we damage your gut flora, plus some of the antibiotics actually damage these things called mitochondria, and these are the parts of the cell that literally give you energy. So for people that have, chronic fatigue, damaging your mitochondria that you need to make energy, it just sort of makes the symptom worse. So my approach is really, dealing with, how do we, get the gut in better working order? Because, up to 80% of your immune function comes from the gut. So we have to have a healthy, functioning gut. And then I talk about, managing diet, making sure you're eating the right things that work with your body instead of against it. And then I've got different herbal protocols that help, deal with the infection to keep the microbial load down. And then it's also looking at all the other environmental and lifestyle factors that influence health. People who, drink too much, smoke too much, don't sleep well, don't exercise. It's really about implementing all these lifestyle changes, managing stress, dealing with all the mind-body issues that comes up for someone, particularly when they have a chronic illness. So, again, I think it's a much more comprehensive approach of looking at the individual versus just treating that one little segment of Lyme.
Just going back to the antibiotics, again, with trying to, wade through my understanding of this, how can the antibiotics help if what you are dealing with is now the Lyme or the autoimmune disease? Am I to understand that you are always going to have some of this bacteria in your system?
Well, again, this is an area that we don't completely understand, and I don't think necessarily everybody who gets Lyme develops those autoimmune symptoms. It's something that can happen, and I think the more persistent the organism is, the greater the probability that that does happen. But for someone, again, who identifies that they've been infected early, they go on antibiotics, you may be able to get rid of the organism, fast enough that it never gets to a point where it triggers that part of your immune system to develop autoimmunity. So certainly not everybody who gets Lyme disease gets an autoimmune issue. But again, I think for someone with chronic Lyme, the longer they've had it, the greater the probability that that happens.
But will antibiotics, if someone's been suffering this or suffers this for years, do antibiotics offer any benefit once the autoimmune disease has kicked in?
Well, this is probably varying opinions, and I certainly know a lot of other Lyme doctors that are primarily antibiotic prescribers, and they will tell you that they've had a lot of patients that have benefited from antibiotic therapy. My experience is such that I see a lot of people that, if they've had chronic Lyme and they go on antibiotics, they might get temporary relief, and often within days to weeks of stopping the antibiotics, they regress and they're kind of back to square one. Some of the new antibiotic regimens that are being used are actually very toxic. And in fact, the latest one, you have to go in every week to get your blood drawn to make sure it's not damaging your kidneys and your liver. So there is that element of toxicity that's possible with some of the regimens. And, of course, the longer you're on the antibiotics, the greater the risk of having some of these side effects. There's another faction of doctors out there. The group is called ILADS. It's the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society. So they are very different than the infectious disease doctors, where they are much more willing to treat Lyme based on clinical symptoms. They will use longer courses of antibiotics. And, it's just a different approach. And if it works for you, great. Again, I see the people where that approach has generally failed, and they're looking for a different alternative. But again, when you look at the research, most of the research out there on, chronic antibiotic use, it hasn't been very impressive.
So you've written a new book. It's called The Lyme Solution. Now, have people taken well to this book? Are they understanding what you're saying? And do you feel that the tide is changing, that people are now sort of registering that maybe there is Lyme disease involved in all the symptomology that's going on with me? Are you finding that people are asking more questions because of the impetus of what you've put out?
Yeah, and I've gotten a lot of, really good feedback on the book, and I get a lot of people who contact me that just say, hey, look, I've had this constellation of symptoms for, months, years. My doctor doesn't believe it's Lyme. They've never tested me. One of the things I have in a book is I have a questionnaire that people can take that can sort of, help identify whether, Lyme might be part of the issue just based on the symptoms alone. Dr. Richard Horowitz, who's really one of the gurus in the Lyme world, in his book, he has a much, much longer questionnaire that's actually been validated in research and find it's a very reliable marker about whether someone may or may not have Lyme. So I have kind of a consolidated version of that. But, people can use that questionnaire as a tool as just a way to help identify whether, these chronic issues may be related to Lyme.
So no issue with sort of self-diagnosing, looking through this questionnaire, because your book offers these solutions that can do no harm.
Well, my book is written for people, for the patient, because I just come across so many people that are in areas where they just don't have a practitioner to work with who understands Lyme or is at least willing to even look at it. So, yeah, in an ideal world, I'd love for people to be in the hands of someone who really understands Lyme and these co-infections, who can give, very clear guidance on how to manage their care, but also understanding that there's just so many people out there that just aren't getting the help they need. So I wanted people to have a tool that they could use on their own, and there's nothing in here that's harmful, dangerous. Everything in here, again, really works well with your body. But, it's always my advice that if you can get, under the care of someone who understands Lyme, I think it's much better for you.
Now, can people use this book in combination with medical treatment?
Yeah, and I do have people who do that as well. Certainly when you're talking about things to help heal your gut, a diet you can follow, all that could be done in conjunction with antibiotic therapy. So I have some people who will still use this even when they're on antibiotics, and if they're on it, fine. If they're not on it, fine. This all still works, again, to kind of help fix the terrain, as I mentioned earlier. So there's nothing in here that's contraindicated with antibiotic therapy.
Can we go step by step through your book to give people a good understanding of how this can help them? Because as we talked about, a lot of Lyme disease goes undiagnosed, and I can imagine that people are listening right now and maybe associating or thinking now some of the symptomology that they have may be associated. We're in Ontario, so that's an area of Lyme disease, correct?
Yeah, in Canada it's really interesting. In fact, I just gave a lecture in Toronto earlier this year, and so I was doing a lot of, research on Canadian stats. The United States reports about 300,000 new cases of Lyme a year. In Canada overall, there's less than 1,000 cases reported, and of those 997 cases in Canada, most of them came from Ontario, Quebec, and I think Nova Scotia. So, it's kind of aligned with where we see it in the U.S., but it just seemed kind of odd that there's such a huge disparity in what we see in the U.S. and what they're reporting in Canada. So I think the Canadian reports are grossly underestimated. As far as I know, ticks don't stop at the border. So, all those neighboring states, we see such a high endemic incidence of Lyme that I don't know why the Canadian provinces that are adjacent would be so much lower. It just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, we did have a question come in, and it is Lyme disease contagious?
That's a great question. In terms of contagious, there's different ways, contagious diseases are transmitted, whether you cough on someone through, sexual contact. I think the question I get asked probably the most is really through sexual contact. And, the research is really lacking. There's very little. There was a study that came out not too long ago that found that people with Lyme, you can find it in women's vaginal secretions and in the semen of men. However, they've not demonstrated that it's necessarily transmitted. I think I take a conservative approach, and for someone who has Lyme, and I do advocate using barrier methods with your partner to protect them because we don't know. But the research really is lacking. But in terms of coughing on someone, that's not the way you really get Lyme disease. So I don't think that's possible. There is possibility of, getting it potentially through sexual contact, although, again, the research hasn't shown that yet. That may be the most likely way. And we do have evidence it is transmitted from mom to baby. So moms that have Lyme disease, we really try to make sure they get good treatment during their pregnancy so it reduces the risk of their child developing Lyme or any kind of developmental issue.
Okay. Now let's go step by step. You offer a 5-step plan in your book. So maybe we can take the remainder of the show and really give people an understanding of what you're offering in your book.
Sure. Well, step one is really about gut health. You topped off the show talking about bone broth and things to help the gut. We just know that the gut is the cornerstone of health. And certainly from the immune system, I said up to 80% of your immune function comes from the gut. And I see so many people with Lyme that have a history of chronic constipation, gas, bloating, diarrhea, whatever it is. So I give you very specific recommendations on what you can do to help heal your gut, make sure that you're digesting and eliminating your food properly. And, the better we can get your gut working, the better your immune system's going to function. And again, we have a lot of really good evidence that when your gut ecology is off, your disposition towards autoimmunity also goes up. So it's another way to help reduce your risk of autoimmune disease. The second step is really about diet. The diet I talk about in the book is what we call an alkaline diet. And an alkaline diet is really about eating foods that promote better pH in your body. Your cells function best in an alkaline pH, with the exception of the stomach, the bladder, and for women, the vaginal area, which are very acidic to protect against outside invaders. The rest of your body is actually very alkaline. And this has nothing to do with changing blood pH. Blood pH is very stable. It doesn't fluctuate. So, again, there's very little research out there on alkaline diet, although it's been promoted for decades. But the studies that have been done have been very positive in terms of how it changes your physiology. So in a nutshell, it's mostly a plant-based diet. We try and limit animal proteins to about 20% of your total dietary intake, and it's really removing any processed or refined foods or anything that are highly acidic, so things like coffee and dairy products and, again, junk foods. So it's nice because it's a diet that people can actually follow. It's not a calorie-restricted diet, so people don't feel hungry. They feel very satiated. But it really just is about shifting the kind of foods you eat. And I think it kind of comes back to our true paleo forefathers, where we were still mostly hunters, we were mostly gatherers. We killed when we could, but, we didn't necessarily eat meat every day. So, meat was part of the diet, but it wasn't a huge part of the diet. So I think it probably more closely reflects that. The third part of the plan is really treating the active infection. So I go through very specific herbal protocols that I've used personally and that I've used with my patients. And there are many, many, many herbal protocols out there. There's not right or wrong. They're just different. So my feeling is, when you start on any kind of herbal protocol, give it 6 to 8 weeks, give it a fair shake to see how you feel. And if you feel like you're improving, stay with it. And if there's no change in the way you feel, then, feel free to move on to one of the other protocols. But the goal of this is, not just to help reduce the microbial load or, get rid of the infection, but, herbs do so many other things that antibiotics don't do. They're anti-inflammatory, they help promote better circulation. They just do so many other things that we don't get with antibiotics. So again, I think they work very synergistically with the body instead of against it. The fourth part of the plan is really about controlling environment. I'm an environmental medicine doctor by training, so there are things you can do to control your world where you're not exposing yourself to toxins and toxicants. So things like chemicals and pesticides and herbicides and air fresheners and all these different things that can tax your immune system. So it's really about cleaning up your home. And I very specifically talk about mold. Mold exposure is the one thing I think mimics Lyme more than anything else. And I come across so many people that, we start treating their Lyme, they're not getting a lot better, and we come to find out down the line that they've got mold in their house. And that mold is actually what's causing a lot of their symptoms. So, mold is one of those things that mimics Lyme very closely, and depending on where you live in the world, some places have more mold exposure than others. But again, if you've been feeling unwell for a long time and you've got a lot of these Lyme symptoms and you're doing Lyme treatment and you're not feeling a lot better, it would definitely be worth investigating mold. So, controlling the environment is something that anybody can do fairly easily. And then the fifth step is really, again, lifestyle factors. So, how do you manage stress? How do you move your body? So I talk about different types of, gentle exercise that people can engage. Some people with Lyme are very ill, and, the thought of doing anything physical is challenging. But I think, no matter what your level of illness is, there's something you can do to get your body moving a little bit. When I was in the throes of Lyme, I would literally just sit on the floor and stretch, and that was about all I could do. But it was a start.
Yep, you're right.
So even something as simple as that can be beneficial. And the other big thing is sleep. I see so many people that once they get Lyme, they just don't sleep well. And when you sleep, particularly that deep restorative sleep, that's when your body repairs and restores itself. That's when the neurons repair themselves. So all that healing, really happens when you're in that deep sleep. And if you're not getting that, you're just missing out on your body's natural capacity to heal itself. So, we talk about a lot of natural strategies to help encourage better sleep. And, the one thing I'll mention to your listeners I think is really important nowadays is Wi-Fi and all the EMFs that we're getting exposed to. So
100%.
I'm an advocate. Yeah, at night, turn off your Wi-Fi, turn off your router, get rid of your smart meters if you can. There's a lot of things you can do to be proactive to protect yourself. And, we're just getting bombarded now with all these EMFs and without really understanding the health consequences. But for someone, again, who's already compromised, it can just be another thing that kind of throws them off. So,
perfect.
Again, that fifth chapter is really just about how you manage all those lifestyle factors.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's a very comprehensive book, and we can find it on Amazon, all the notary spots, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us, Dr. Ingels. The book is called The Lyme Solution. And again, you can find it on Amazon, all your favorite book website channels. And everybody, we will talk to you next week on The Health Hub.
You have been listening to The Health Hub, hosted